let's go ahead.
Go from there.
Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm sure a few more folks will be joining us as they're making their way here. We're so grateful that you're here. We're grateful to Lydia for taking time to share with us. A couple reminders: if you stay on mute, that'd be great. And if you want to show your face, we'd love to see it. Um, and just kind of pretend we're in on a big round kitchen table somewhere having a chat. Um, we will have time for questions, so you can at any time put them in the chat, and later in the evening, Brittany will be working with those with Lydia. And if you're just joining, and you can grab a pen and some paper and a rock if you have it, um, and we will get going. So welcome everyone, Brittany.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to share a few brief announcements before we introduce our guest speaker tonight. First up, if you haven't yet read Lydia's wonderful book, buy the book or rent it from your library. This Sweet Earth, Walking with Our Children in the Age of Climate Collapse. This was published last summer by Broadleaf Books and is available on bookshop.org, Books a Million, IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, your local library. If it's not there, request it. And wherever you purchase your books. And we'll also send out a link after later this week with email link to Kirkridge's bookshop.org bookshelf as well. We also want to let you know about one of our upcoming features. Faith and Money Network is our Sabbath Economics Household Practices Covenant groups. This is a great small study group that meets via Zoom once a month for 2 hours for an 8-month commitment. It is based on Ched Meyer's work of Sabbath Economics, and it's a study of these 7 household practices that you see listed here. It's a great way to get both accountability and community around this kind of work as you're looking to make lifestyle changes, maybe dealing with finances and entering a new phase of life. And our next round of these small groups will begin in January of 2026. So we will send out more information on these as well. Mike, anything to add on these groups?
No, just that they're a blast. They're a lot of fun, and you learn a lot from one another. You know our saying, the smartest person in the room is the room. So we learn from one another.
Lastly, just a general reminder that you can learn more about Faith and Money Network at our website, faithandmoneynetwork.org. You all likely receive our monthly newsletter, but on the site, we've got more information about study groups, trips of perspective, regular blog posts, and event updates on the site. And to learn more about Lydia's work at Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center, you can visit kirkridge.org. She will also be sharing some specifics on upcoming retreats, I believe, toward the end of this call, that we'll send out details via email as well. That's
Thank
it
you.
for announcements. Mike, I'll turn it over to you for
All right. Thank you.
introductions.
It's my honor to introduce Lydia. For those of you who don't know her, she's a writer, an activist, and a mother. She's the director of Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center in the Pocono Mountains of eastern Pennsylvania. It's gorgeous. She's the author of This Sweet Earth, Walking with Our Children in the Age of Climate Collapse, and the editor of The Sandbox Revolution, Raising Kids for a Just World. Lydia was previously the editor of G's Magazine. Lydia, we are delighted to have you join us. Welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brittany. It's a gift to be with all of you and in this circle. And there are many of your faces that I know and many that I don't. And I'm grateful for the chance, as Mike said, to sit around the table together this evening. I think one of the things that I love about having written this book means that I get to keep being at those dining room tables with community to bring the questions and longings and anxieties and griefs that I'm carrying, and I think so many of us are carrying, and so often we're carrying them alone, and hold them together. So I'm going to take some time to name some stories and some questions and some of the things that feel like they're metabolizing in me these days. And I also really look forward to a moment to have some questions and conversations and to hear what you're noticing and holding. I brought with me a stone from Kirkridge here on the Kittatinny Ridge, and invited you all, if you have a stone in your reach, to bring it with you and to hold it. I have spent most of my life in Detroit, Michigan. But 3 years ago, my family and I moved here to Kirkridge, which has long been a place of rest and imagination and resistance and beloved community. And Kirkridge is on Lenni Lenape land. And Shelley DePaul, who's one of the Lenape clan mothers in the area, was walking around the land with us one day, and she said, "Do you know about stones?" She said, "When a prayer is prayed over a stone, that prayer never leaves the stone." And I think about that almost every day. Kirkridge is a place that is stone upon stone upon stone, and Kirkridge has only had a small part of the history of this place, of this land, this past 80 years. But Kirkridge was founded on the slogan "Pick it and pray." So there have been decades and decades and generations of prayers that are held in this stone. And so I bring one of them with me today, a little bit of earth, to join us in this screened world that we're sharing today. And for you, hold a stone in your hand too. And to know that so many prayers are held in those stones already, and that the prayers and longings and griefs that we bring to this space today become part of the history of this stone. When I was a kid, growing up in Detroit, my dad would watch the weather forecast in the winter. And when there was going to be a long stretch that was really cold, he would go outside and he would take our hose and he would spray the whole backyard with water. And then he would come back in 3 hours and he would do it again and do it again. And after a couple days, my sister and I had this magical ice rink in our backyard, and we would skate around the apple tree and the picnic table. Um, and for weeks, we would have this magical backyard. And my kids, Isaac and Cedar, are now 12 and 9. And they know that apple tree really well. They've climbed it dozens and dozens of times. And we've eaten around that picnic table many times. They're never going to know what it's like to skate in that backyard. The days don't stay cold long enough. They dip down and then they dip up, and there's a warm day. And there's so many moments like that where just the brief time between my childhood and theirs, I can see the ways that climate has shifted. All of us are feeling climate change all around us, and we might feel it in little ways like harvesting apples a little earlier each year, or in big ways as so many beloveds face evacuation orders for fires or floods or hurricanes. The rains fall harder, snow comes less, aqueducts are drying up, fires burn faster, the air grows toxic, the songbirds are growing quiet, mountaintops are being harvested, topsoil's drifting away, plastics filling the oceans. It's too much. And I think so many of us have already tasted climate catastrophe, and if we haven't, we probably will soon. And so often it just feels like how can we do anything but weep? And now we stand at a historical and political moment, 8 months into the Trump administration, and I think it's even more terrifying, right? We pulled out of the Paris Agreement, we're dropping regulations, we're amping up to drill for oil, and pipeline paths are being opened. Just this week, the EPA announced that they're no longer requiring major polluters to report their greenhouse emissions. I can't see yet what's standing before us, but my whole body knows that the earth is in more dire danger than we were 8 months ago. On the morning after the election, I had to wake up my kids for school and tell them that Trump had won. And I told my 9-year-old Cedar that Trump won, and his eyes immediately filled with tears. And he said, "What about the turtles?" And I've cried a lot over the last few months, for the people of Gaza, for students who've been abducted and deported, for trans folks and queer folks and immigrants ushered into planes and carried to detention centers in El Salvador, all those who so instantly lost jobs. But who is crying out for the turtles? I want to just pause for a minute together. As you were coming in, Mike and Brittany invited you to bring paper and pencil. And so if you have that, or if you just want to take a moment to think about what really is your relationship to hope in these days. If you're being really honest about what you're feeling in your body, what is your relationship to hope? And we'll just take 3 minutes of quiet together, and hold that question. Take a minute to wrap that up, and maybe I'll sing us a quick song as we come back, so you can finish your thoughts. May the land I love speak for me. May the land I love speak for me. And when I get to the road and I lay down my heavy load, may the land I love speak for me. I often find that the moments where I'm feeling a little too close to something that resembles despair, um, it's often either touching the earth, or my kids that pull me back into the present. I can reach for the hand of my 9-year-old who will lead me outside to watch the cicada emerging from its skin, and I feel my whole body rearrange. Um, I'm so sort of overwhelmed with gratitude and awe for the kids in my life, and I feel like more and more I find myself following their lead. They have such a capacity for beauty and miracles and for slowing down, for wonder and awe, that I feel it rearranging me and who I am and what my vocation is in this moment. And I also feel like I'm spending a lot of time thinking about like what are those bone lessons I want my kids to know moving forward. I don't know what's coming. I don't know what this is going to look like. So what are the things that I want them to have in them ready to draw on? And that's a lot of what I found myself writing on. And I want to be really clear whenever I'm talking about our children that I mean that, and I mean family as wide as our imaginations can stretch. That all of us are bound up in the lives of children and intergenerational community. And I really hope that these questions and stories that we're raising feel alive to all of us, whether we're parents or grandparents or uncles or teachers or neighbors. We're all caring about what's going to come next for the generations, and we're all engaged in one way or another in intergenerational community. A few winters ago, when my oldest Isaac was 6, we were outside. We had had a big snowfall, and we lived on the corner in Detroit, so that we had a lot of shoveling to do. So I was out there shoveling, and Isaac was building this epic snow fort. And we worked in silence for a long time, and I would occasionally throw him a big snow shovel full of snow. And then at one point, out of the quiet, he just said, "Mommy, I love nature so much, more than anything. I would go to jail for my whole life if it meant that nature could be free and never harmed again." And I put down my shovel and I held silence for a while. There's so much in so few words, grief and longing and a desire to do something. Sometimes I think when your kids say something like that, you worry about them for how much grief they're holding, for how extreme it all sounds. And then on the other hand, here he was expressing how much he loved the world and made clear that he was willing to risk a lot in order to find another way. What are each of us willing to risk? What are the new ways or the old ways? How do we get clear about how important this is? And then tend to an imagination strong enough to walk into this moment. In January, as we were preparing for the inauguration, I learned that the root word for inauguration actually means to pay attention to God by listening to the omens of the birds. And that radically shifted what I kept my eyes on in January. I found myself paying attention to the red-tailed hawks and the cardinals in the snow and the juncos on the ground under our bird feeder with way more attention. 3 billion birds have gone missing in the US and Canada since 1970. 90% of those are species that we see on a daily basis, like sparrows and blackbirds and warblers and finches. 92 million red-winged blackbirds alone have disappeared. The humans keep ruining ecosystems that make it no longer possible for birds to survive in the same way. And species are shrinking and disappearing. Sometimes I worry that it's all happening without us even noticing. And it's not just the creatures and the birds and the trees that are being wiped out, but language itself, right? We're forgetting their names. The Oxford Junior Dictionary regularly evaluates which words to include in their limited pages of their book based on what children need to know. And over the past 15 years, there's an influx of technology words, broadband, email, cut and paste. And what words have come out to make room? Acorn, willow, dandelion. In 2007, the Oxford Junior Dictionary removed 50 nature words and another 50 in 2012. Bluebell, fern, kingfisher, otter. These words aren't necessary or commonplace for children anymore. They're not being taught, they're not being learned. What's the cost? I wonder how our children will notice the blue herons disappearing if they don't even know what they're called. And so I think about the ways that the simple act of naming becomes a way of remembering, of paying attention, of determining what has value in our lives. The simple act of language becomes resistance. So we learn their names: white-throated sparrow, northern cardinal, mourning dove, so that if they start to go silent, we'll notice. In moments when I do feel overwhelmed, and particularly in raising kids in this moment, I often think of this line from Senegalese environmentalist Baba Diom, who said, and this is a paraphrase, "You can't save a place you don't love, you can't love a place you don't know, and you can't know a place that you haven't learned." And I think that that is some of the most radical work that we can do, is help ourselves and help the children in our lives learn the land that holds them. And that learning becomes knowing, and that knowing leads to loving. And once you love something, it can change everything. Once you deeply love a place and then you see harm coming, you can't help but put your body on the line and cry out for justice. So I think in that way, some of the most powerful work we can do is actually the work of watershed literacy, and that can look a million different ways. We can learn the names of the bugs and the birds and the trees that are around us. We can lie down on our bellies and watch the milkweed disappear as the caterpillar grows fat, or wander our neighborhoods and search for wild edibles like wild grapevines and tiger lilies and the roots of Queen's Anne lace. We can let mud get between our toes, climb the apple trees. And with each moment that we're squandering in our watershed, we're learning this place and we're falling in love. And we pray that that changes everything. Jimmy Boggs, who was a longtime activist and now ancestor in Detroit, said that revolutions are made out of love for people and for place. If we love our neighbors and we fall head over heels for the oak trees and the wild raspberries, then we'll build a revolution. We love place and we love people, we love our neighbors. And I think this really begs the question of community. What is the role of community in this moment? And I want to spend some time talking about that. And I know all of us have amazing stories of community. I just want to share sort of some of the ones that have been rising up for me. Um, my partner and I lived in the neighborhood in Southwest Detroit where I was raised, um, sort of right after college, before we had kids. And we were committed to living in intentional community. We were with other recent college grads. We were making commitments around meals and life sharing and hospitality and work in the neighborhood. And it was messy and we made a lot of mistakes. Sometimes we moved too fast and learned the beauty of slowing down. But we really loved one another and the neighborhood. And I remember so vividly at the beginning, we were like, how do we build community? How do we get to know our neighbors? Like, should we deliver bread and make a flyer? What do we do? And suddenly, without sort of knowing it, what really sealed the deal on community was getting baby chicks. These tiny fuzzy creatures that like lived in a cardboard box smelling up our basement just sort of changed everything for us. And each day we would bring them into the backyard. And on that first day, a brother and sister who were like 5 and 8 years old wandered into the back, having heard that we had chicks, and immediately fell in love. They just picked up those chicks and laughed really hard. And by the next day, there were more kids. And then the next day, there were more kids. And then as the sun would come down, the parents started coming back, and we began to learn one another's names and learn one another's stories. Um, and that felt like the beginning. And then suddenly we were having potlucks in the backyard, and we were offering homework help for kids and doing grocery runs for elders. By the following year, we held our first block party that was not organized and messy, but we put out a date and everything came out. People brought tables and chairs and food, and suddenly there was an epic game of the adults musical chairs and karaoke long into the night. And it was just sort of amazing to see this neighborhood where people were from so many different walks of life, and yet pouring out joy together and really quickly realizing the ways that our lives were bound up together. And we continued having block parties and light parades and neighborhood garage sales and trick-or-treating and altars at Dia de los Muertos. And I think that the community also, like, it didn't just sort of teach me sort of the power of community politically and culturally, but also financially. Um, my relationship to money changed in those days, and I remember really vividly one June, we had lots of fruit trees in our yard, and our cherry trees were abundant. And a neighbor came over and said, "Can I pick some cherries?" And we said, "Of course." And he brought over his ladder and he picked a bag of cherries. And when he left, he handed us a $5 bill. And later that night, his 11-year-old knocked on our door and asked if we wanted to buy a pupusa dinner. And we said, "Of course." And he handed us a container of pupusas and beans and rice. And I handed him back that same $5 bill. And in that moment, I recalibrated my understanding of economics and what local economy could be. Like, how do we figure out how to keep as many dollars in our neighborhood as humanly possible? And that summer we ended up we started a little farmers market in our little 2-block neighborhood, and the kids and I would drag out tables and chairs on Wednesday afternoon, and we would bring out whatever we had an abundance of, grapes and pears and lavender, eggs from our chickens, and other neighbors brought kale and beets and tomatoes. Someone brought over coolers full of queso and tamales, honey. We always had so much honey. And everyone would just come and sit and chat for 2 hours. And then at the end of the night, we would pass around some dollar bills, and everybody would go home with arms full of gifts from the earth and community. And local economy just kept growing. We would pay teenagers to do yard work and contracted with our neighbors for plumbing and construction jobs. And one household had a bakery out of their house on Sundays, and another had a restaurant in their basement. We can give less money to corporations and keep money as local as possible. And so much of that has to do with getting to know our neighbors and learning what our skills are. And that's not always that normal in our culture, to actually know who it is that we're living around. Um, and also the ways we can pull money out of the equation, right? Like, we shared lawnmowers and shovels and washing machines, and we'd have painting parties and help each other stack wood. We could rely on community and live with less money and less stuff and create less waste and create so much more joy, right? I think about when we first moved into the neighborhood. We didn't have a TV, and it was really sort of before streaming services were quite so popular. And it was very important that we watch Grey's Anatomy every Thursday. And we had one neighbor who lived next door who said, "Come over and you can watch Grey's Anatomy." And suddenly there would be like 15 of us every Thursday night gathering in her living room, and she would buy us a lot of candy, and we would sit and gossip about the neighborhood. And we watched Grey's at her house for years. And I often think, like, we could have had 15 different TVs going all in our homes watching this. Or we could do this rather ridiculous thing and share resources and build relationships. I often also think about sort of so many of the lessons that I think a lot of us in neighborhoods learned during COVID, and the ways that, like, we really had this moment where I think we could have made some really radical shifts in what community and neighborhoods and looked like. I remember the beginning of March 2020 when we all just sort of tucked into our houses, and isolated and held so much sort of anxiety and exhaustion and loneliness. And that there was this moment where I feel like it kind of trickled all over, where folks sort of realized, like, this is not sustainable to be so isolated, and folks started gathering outside in their neighborhoods, right? So we started gathering at 5 o'clock outdoors, masked, distanced, and we'd wave to one another and ask how we were doing. We sang together, we did sidewalk chalk, and we carried on like this for weeks and months, and we celebrated every birthday, and we threw distanced parades on holidays. Cedar learned to ride his bike at that point, and he had 24 adults outside cheering him on as he, like, figured out how to ride his bike down the bumpy sidewalk. And just as the months went on, like, we checked in on our elders, and we knew who was immune compromised, and we shared recipes, and we gathered medicinal plants from the neighborhood, and we made fire cider, and we collected and redistributed stimulus checks. by those who were systemically denied them due to immigration status. We really were one another's first line of defense. It was a time to care for one another's spirits and bodies. And this was not the first crisis we had faced as a neighborhood, and it wouldn't be the last. Um, but little did we know that for so many years, all of the little ordinary ways that we showed up for one another and learned one another's names prepared us for the pandemic. We intuitively knew how to be there for one another because we had practiced. I often think of civil rights historian Vincent Harding's line that's you can't start a movement, you can only prepare for one. And I think that's what this is. I think that feels like what community building is in this moment, that we put our hands in the dirt and we fall in love with the people and places, and that helps us be ready. The crises that we faced during the pandemic might not be that different from whatever we face in climate crisis, right? We may be stuck at home and isolated without access to usual conveniences. We may ask similar questions about can we grow food and bake bread and gather medicine and share resources and know one another's needs and find joy in the midst of pain. Every act of building community right now becomes part of the strength we have when disaster comes. That there's really beautiful simplicity work of this moment of what it means to learn one another's names, to ask to borrow a cup of sugar, to sit on our porches, to tell stories. And beyond even just sort of the realization that we really do need one another, I think that community is also an antidote to despair. These times have a way of working into our guts and leaving us pretty depressed and uncertain, and yet it's a lot harder to be hopeless if you're surrounded by loved ones who can squeal at the joy of a first bike ride or laugh with a baby chick in their hands, or sing long into the night. And I think perhaps what's most hopeful too about it is like there's so many ways to build community. Like there's nothing too small and there's nothing too big. And the small moves that we can make now to find ourselves some people can make a lot of difference. I think we know that climate change is going to put the American dream's concept of individualism to the test. We've really been manipulated to believe that if we're succeeding, we're doing it on our own. I do not think that there is any way we can do this on our own. I don't think our hearts can stand it. I don't think our bodies will actually know what to do. That we have the opportunity to each learn a little bit and rely on one another for the rest. And I think that same thing is true in parenting, right? I just feel so incredibly grateful that I am not the only adult responsible for the human beings that my kids are coming, right? They're becoming. There's so many grown-ups in their lives who are teaching them in a million different ways. I just think about that 2-block area and all the people who would surround our kids and would swoop in and take them along to things. They would disappear into neighbors' backyards to build tree houses or go off to catch fish or play piano. They learned how to, get honey out of beehives and to play soccer. One neighbor would make puppets with them that could squirt water out of their mouths. Or another neighbor would come over and ring the doorbell when the warblers, the orioles, were passing through on their migratory journeys, right? That there's just so many things. And as they get older, those folks are still in their lives. And, they're adults who can bake bread and speak Spanish and mend pipes and clean chimneys and play guitar and throw clay bowls, play chess, make tamales, knit sweaters, cut hair, on and on. I just feel such undeniable gratitude for the gift of community, that we all know how to do something and we don't have to do it all. And we can lean on one another and keep learning new things. And I say that all knowing that like community is really messy. And I think we all have also felt the pain of community. There's no possibility of perfection. We're humans. that make mistakes and hurt one another. It can be a real pain, but I do believe that it has a tendency to save us. I think that that neighborhood did save me repeatedly, and I'd stake my life on it. I believe that community really is the greatest gift that I can offer our kids in this moment. I was thinking about too, sort of what it means to hold joy in this moment. And a few years ago, our family was out east on the ocean, which as Midwesterners is not something we always get to experience. And we had we're walking along the coast, and we're coming up to a point where the waves were crashing from both sides, and there was lots of rocks out on the edge. And all of a sudden, Cedar got close to the edge, and then he turned around. And he's like, "They're not rocks; they're seals." And sure enough, right, there's just this huge community of seals who are sunbathing on the shore. And we just sort of all froze and held our breath at sort of the beauty of it. And we snuck over to a driftwood log and just sat there watching for a really long time. And there were all of these baby seals tucked in with the grown-ups, and they didn't seem scared of us. We just all sort of sat there together. But after about 20 minutes or so, my kids were getting bored and they wanted to get a lot closer to the seals, and they were sneaking up. And Aaron and I looked at each other. We're city Midwesterner people. We don't really know if this is a good idea, if this is a safe idea. We don't really know a lot about seals, but we're trying, we don't want to make them anxious. So we're just kind of keeping an eye on it. And all of a sudden the kids get close and the seals just start moving, right? They're just jumping into the water. And a whole bunch of them jumped in the water. They went about like 15 or 20 feet out, and they turned around and they just stared at us. And I could not tell if they were angry, if they were scared, but it was pretty intense. They were right there and they were just staring at us. And I was like, all right, I think we should start heading back. And so the kids like turned around, and all of a sudden the seals started following next to us. Um, and we weren't quite sure what was going on when it kept going, and then the kids would run down the beach, and the seals would dive under the water, and they would come back up right wherever the kids stopped. And it suddenly became very clear that these seals were playing with the kids and that they wanted to play. And that just the kids just kept, they would run, and then the seals would go and they would stop. The seals would stay with us if we stopped to take a break for a snack. And it just went on like this for more than a mile. And just, it was just sort of overwhelming to just sort of feel this magic of the way that across species we could just sort of have so much delight and play and laughter. And then it started to get dark, and I looked like maybe a storm was coming, and my head was starting to hurt. I could feel the pressure changing, and so it was sort of time to go. And we said goodbye to the seals. And we got back to the cabin we were staying, and it felt way too dark for how early it was, and I could sort of see the sun through. And I went onto my phone and quickly realized like this wasn't a storm. This was wildfire smoke. And as as a Midwesterner, I had always thought like, oh, this is a West Coast climate catastrophe. It's not one of the ones that I'm gonna know. And that was sort of the first day of many when we experienced the wildfire smoke from Canada, both on the East Coast and the Midwest. 34 million acres had burned. And we started to learn sort of what the terror and frustration was when it wasn't safe to send your kids outside. All in this one afternoon, we experienced this sort of overwhelming joy at playing with seals on the edge of the ocean, and this overwhelming fear as the next climate crisis blew its smoke overhead. And I think that feels like part of our work in this moment. It's like how to live in that tension, to look the crisis right in the eye that is before us and somehow still find joy. To choose joy, to claim joy, not the numb kind of happiness that comes with ignoring it, but sort of the gut wrenching, belly aching joy that emerges having looked it in the eye. I don't know where things are headed with climate change, right? I can't see it. There is this possibility that we get it right, that we let our imaginations carry us and our love for the world drive us, and we shift and we make huge changes and we learn new ways and reclaim old ways and transition these death-dealing profit systems to life-giving, generous ones. And it's amazing. That way feels less possible to me in these days. And another possibility is that we don't get it right? Weather gets more volatile and politics get even more deadly and systems crumble and we face into the worst. I don't know. I can oscillate between both and a million possibilities in the middle. But what I've realized is that either way doesn't change how I want to live. I want to fall in love with the red-winged blackbirds and let that change everything. I want to pour my life into this struggle with all of the grief and all of the joy. I want to fight like hell and grow tomatoes. I want to worship with the praying mantis and learn how to build composting toilets. I want to play with my kids and sing in the wind. I want to honor the dead and feed the birds. Either way doesn't change that there can be joy and laughter and awe and wonder and love and community. And either way sharpens my gaze on what matters and what just doesn't. Either way, I want to figure out how to live as humanly as possible and invite the kids in my life into knowing what it means to be alive on this sweet earth. And I think there's something in that around hope for me. And I want to say that when I started writing this book, I was feeling pretty hopeless. But the more that I wrote and the more stories that I told, the more I kept stumbling on hope. And I think what happened is actually that my understanding of hope changed. My hope isn't anymore that things are going to be okay. I don't hold hope that we're going to get this right and we're going to get it and everything's going to be okay. Instead, my hope is realizing that the shifts that we need to make in this moment are actually the shifts that I want to make. They're the ways that I want to live. And I so often, one of the things I hear most often when talking to parents and grandparents and is this like grief of like, but our kids aren't going to have what we have. And I realized in writing these stories that I don't actually want them to have what we had. I want them to be able to know how to bury the dead. I want them to be able to know what resistance feels like in their whole bodies. I want them to be able to create things with their hands, to depend on community over corporations, to delight in a field of flowers, to grow their own food, to be able to look truth in the face, to know the pileated woodpecker by name. This is actually the life that I want for them, and that's a gift, and that's hope to me. I think of one other sort of hopeful story in this moment for me came in March when things were feeling pretty hard in March, and it was sort of hard to figure out like how to move. And Isaac turned 12 in March, and he has 4 ducks that he loves. He's Papa Duck, and he hatched these ducks in his bedroom. They live outside now, but like he loves them very, very deeply. Quackenbush, Stringfellow, Peanut Butter, and Jelly are their names. And he was very, very clear that for his 12th birthday, he wanted a duck fashion show. We weren't really sure what this meant, but he had a clear vision and he invited over his friends from school and he built a runway and he covered it in red plastic tablecloths and lined it with gold streamers and he collected outfits and he made a playlist. And when the time came, he dressed up these ducks and sent them down the runway and they wore tutus and tuxedos and leather jackets and bonnets and it was so beautiful. And the world was crap, and everything felt depressing. And yet here was this incredibly creative, kind, weird child of mine who could throw a duck fashion show and knew how to be in touch with joy and beauty and laughter. And I watched these ducks poop on this runway and show off their sequins, and I thought, we're gonna be okay. Um, so what do we do? I think we pour our lives into whatever it means to be as close to the earth as possible. Here's some ideas, and then I'll open it up for questions and conversations. But here's a list. Do one of them, do all of them, write your own list. Change a few things, change everything in your life. Research where your trash goes and visit it if you can. Bike, dig up your lawn and plant native plants. Use gray water to flush your toilet, harvest wild edibles, write a love letter to your favorite body of water, hang a bird feeder, find a tree to share your secrets with, carry a stone in your pocket, learn beekeeping, buy a farm share, buy local, learn some more names of your neighbors, throw a funeral for a fallen sparrow, stop shopping at Amazon, put your phone away, ask to borrow a couple of eggs from a neighbor, slow down, work less, join mutual aid projects, learn the principles of environmental justice, make plans for your own death, host a clothing swap party, join a free cycle, find a free store, write poetry, show up when young people call you to be in the streets, gather wildflowers for your kitchens, compost, mend clothes, host potlucks, use the library, learn from Indigenous organizing in your area, read the newspaper, follow the lead of children, eat less meat, eat no meat, stop buying bottled water, repair your toaster, learn your ancestry, hang laundry, make homemade gifts, quit your job and find a way to do what you love, save seeds from your vegetable garden, write 10 things you're grateful for every day, say you're sorry to the blue whale and the snow leopard and the red panda, take a nap. So I'm gonna pause there and open it up for questions or comments or stories and um, just hold this moment together.
Mm. Thank you so much, Lydia. I mean, it's so inviting and convicting at the same time. And a duck fashion show, I want to party with that kid. That's brilliant. I love it. So, I mean, I think we could sit in silence for 20 minutes and just take in what you shared, but um, I know I could. But I do want to give people the opportunity to make comments, to put some questions if you have them in the chat, and Brittany um, will get them to Lydia. So please do that as you feel led. Mm.
Ooh, great question from Heidi. Have you received love notes or feedback about your book, Lydia? What kinds of things have you heard from readers?
Good question. I don't know if I've received love notes. I last summer I traveled around quite a bit and sort of preached and offered retreats and sort of talked in a lot of different spaces. And I think a couple of the things that were really striking to me sort of were generational. Like I feel like there were moments where I was in spaces with like 18, 19, 20-year olds who like just started crying and saying, I haven't heard any adults I know talk about this or believe me that this is real. Um, and I like that happened repeatedly in like different states. And I think that's a real thing. And it actually sort of connects to the other piece of this where like I got a lot of pushback from elders who said we need to let kids be kids and we can't talk about this with them.
Mm.
Um, and this real question of like pushback when I would talk about like sort of a real belief that I think we need to tell our kids the truth. about this stuff. And I think those are connected. Like, I think it feels so scary um, to us grown-ups that we're not talking to young people about it. And then they get to be teenagers and they're just learning about it and they're angry at us for not having done anything or talked about it. And um, so I do feel like there is this just sort of real, I think so many of us are carrying so much anxiety all the time in us, and we're not talking about it out loud together and with one another in intergenerational spaces. And so I feel like that's sort of one of the things I've heard the most.
Mm, mm.
Lydia, I'm thinking back to your example at the beginning when you talked about all the technological words being added to dictionary and all the natural words coming out. As the parent of kids who are school age, what is it like to navigate that tension between them like needing that technology, needing to work in that, being able to how to navigate that space, but also leaning into their weirdness and putting costumes on their ducks?
Totally. I mean, I think technology is a huge thing. I have a whole sort of chapter on sort of navigating technology and what does it mean in this moment. And I had this, you know, we are definitely in the situation where our kids, are around screens and play video games, and we're sort of always trying to navigate that. But I remember this one moment where I was like driving and I was like hearing them in this debate in the back of the car talk about like the difference in strength between oak trees and maple trees for carpentry. I was like, what are they talking about? Like, how do they know the difference in wood grain? And I sort of felt really excited about this. And then I very quickly realized they were talking about Minecraft. And like that is the space where they're learning about types of wood and they have these craft boxes and they can put in like wool and something else and it makes a sweater and they can put in eggs and flour and it makes a cake. And I was like, I want my kids to know the difference between an oak and a maple tree by putting their hands on the bark. And I want them to know what it's like and what it feels like in their hands and in their noses to make a cake. And I want them to know how to knit a sweater. Um, and like I want them to fall in love with the real tangible world around them. So how do we hold that? Um, and we had a moment, I have like sort of a real story about like choosing to do a digital detox, where we were like, this is too much. We need a break. It takes 2 weeks to get the dopamine out of your brain. And then we like did it. And it was amazing to sort of see what happened when we just like fully turned screens off for 2 weeks and like what they got excited to do. And like that they started going outside and they started all these new crafting projects. And it was like just a helpful reminder to me too, to be like, none of this is like we're not stuck. Like we can feel like, oh, we've dipped too far into technology and we can make changes and we can figure out how to hold that and um we can realize when like this is not good for their brains or their hearts, their bodies, and how do we navigate that. But it's real, and both, they all have computers at school. Like it is just part of their world.
We have a question about whether any advice of yours might change for parents of mid and older teens.
Hmm. Well, you might have more advice than me. I, don't have teens yet, and so I'm about to learn a lot about that from them. But I mean, I do feel like one of the things that feels most sort of important in this moment is figuring out, like, both as adults, like how do we really feel our feelings in this moment? Like, how do we let ourselves feel anxious and terrified and like where are the spaces that we have to grieve and cry and scream? Um, and how do we give our kids spaces for that too? That like I think that is part of why I feel really clear that we sort of need to tell our kids the truth about what's happening so that like there's a space to process that with people who love them. And I'm gonna guess that in the teenage years, like there could be a lot of anger or a lot of fear, um, a lot of anger at us and our generations. And so how to like really just give our kids spaces um, for all of those feelings and to like honor them and honor their wisdom and what they're seeing and like and take their lead. How do we like let our kids' asks be taken seriously? Our Isaac, when he was like 5 or 6, was like, I'm not driving a car. We have to get rid of our car. It is bad for climate change. And, we lived in Detroit, which is the car capital of the world. Like, public transportation was dismantled in that city. And we're like, I don't think we can live without a car, right? But like, figured out how to like bike to school. Aaron biked him to school every day, 5 miles. And eventually, like when we had to get a new used car, we got a Prius. And like that was because of Isaac's like clear call. And I think it's really easy to just sort of like shake off our kids like requests is like, yeah, that's just like not practical. But like what are the ways that like actually we hear them and we like pay attention as much as we can and we like let them shift us as much as possible. And maybe too to say like something about truth and telling our kids the truth. Like I think there are lots of ways that this book ends up feeling like a love letter to both sort of the children in my lives and the generations to come, and also a love letter to the generations before me. Like, what does it mean for me to have sort of grown up in Catholic worker and anti-war movements, and sort of what are these lessons from past movements that are sort of remetabolized in this moment? And I was someone who like I had parents who did sort of very clearly tell us the truth about injustice. And I've always felt really, really grateful for that. Like I felt honored by that truth telling. I felt like there was a role for me that I was sort of invited into movement work. And I think what I realized and what I'm realizing now as a parent is like it's not the truth that like makes our kids unsafe. Like where our safety actually comes from, I think, is from being loved and being held and having community. And so if we can wrap our kids around with love and community that can help hold that, then they can actually hold the truth. Um, and I think that actually becomes a really important act that we all need to get better at doing because it's really hard. I remember, Cedar asking me when he was 5, he said, are human beings going extinct? Well, that's a hard question to answer as a parent, and yet like we need to be able to figure out how to speak truthfully to that question.
I just want to make note of Jen's comment, which I think is really true. Remember that silence is the coping pattern of a dysfunctional family. And I'm guessing the reason the parents didn't want the kids to hear about that is they didn't want to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they used their kids as an excuse.
Yeah. I mean, I think our culture
Yeah.
is one
Yeah.
of silence. Like I think we are in a dysfunctional
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
that does not want to talk about it.
That's right. Anybody else? We have a couple minutes. We got any other questions or comments? Lydia, you gave us a lot to think about. Thank you. One follow-up comment. Okay. Thank you, Curtis. Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
Lydia, one other
Lydia,
question I would ask
yeah.
is, do you have any other um recommendations in terms of like books, resources, newsletters, things that, have also helped give you hope or perspective as a parent?
Mm-hmm. I'll think about that. And maybe I'll try to pull together some things that could go out in the email.
Yeah, great.
I do like one of the things that I put in the back of the book are like children's books that I love that sort of address earth related themes. And I think that there's just such a growing list, like more and more books are coming out, but yeah, I'll try to pull something together and send that to you.
Great.
Well, thank you, Lydia, so much. And really, you've given us a lot to take in and consider. And I'm so grateful that we've recorded this. Um, and thank you all for being here. And you'll get this recording in the next few days. Um, Remember to check out the Kirkridge website. It's a beautiful place. And if Faith and Money Network can do anything for you, check out our website. And if you have any follow up with Lydia or with us, please please do so.
I think before we all depart, Lydia's going to share
Great.
a couple upcoming events at Kirkridge and also lead us out in a prayer together.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will send out these as well in the follow-up email, but a couple of retreats that are happening at Kirkridge that feel relevant. Susan Raffo is leading a retreat on land, and the way she holds land and stories is pretty incredible. So thinking about repair and relationship and remembering, that's in October. And we also in October, we've got a retreat with the Iona community, specifically on hope and community. So that's another place where I think there's some intersection, and it would just be wonderful to have you on the mountain. And I know that you're all spread out all over the place. And some of you are in Canada and might not be traveling to the US anytime soon. But you're always welcome in any way that you can use this space. But I wonder about just taking a moment for those of you who have your rock, and all of us who have rocks beneath our feet, and just to take a minute to think about what is the prayer that we're holding in this moment? What is the prayer that we want to put into those rocks that will live in this rock and be held for generations to come? And just take a minute to hold that either silently, to pour it in the rock. Welcome to pour it into the chat if you want. I'll end with these words from Mario Benedetti and then a prayer to close us out. This is just a few lines from Mario Benedetti's amazing poem, Porque Cantamos, and this is translated. If each hour brings death, if time is just a den of thieves, the breezes carry a scent of evil, and life is just a moving target, you will ask why we sing. We sing because the river is humming, and when the river hums, the river hums. We sing because cruelty has no name, but we can name its destiny. We sing because the child, because everything, because the future, because the people. We sing because of the survivors, and our dead want us to sing. Friends, I'm really, really grateful for this time together this evening, and pray that these are days of singing. O God of the wild waters and the ancient stones, who dwells in the bellies of the honeybees and the roots of the grandmother oak, may we fall more deeply in love with the white pines and the salamanders and all of creation of which we are a part. And may that love change everything. In this time, may we lean into the messy tenderness of community. May we transform. May we be willing to risk. May we transform what we're willing to hope for and who we are on the sweet earth. May we never stop asking about the turtles. May we enter these waters and rise up singing because the river is humming, and when the river hums, the river hums. May we sing because we cannot do otherwise. Amen.
Thank you, Lydia.
Mhm. Thank you all.
Yeah. Brittany, anything else we need to